most of the time that we have together. So yes, welcome everyone. It's great to see so many of you here today. For those who I haven't met before, my name is Lily Meissner and I'm a consultant here at MPC, and I'm joined by my colleague Tom Liscombe, our brilliant principal of theorising change. Thank you again for joining us today to speak about achieving impact in education innovation. And a huge thank you to Bonnie from the Templeton World Charity Foundation, who we have here today, for supporting this entire piece of work. So before we get into the event, do keep on introducing yourself in the chat if you'd like to. And there are just a couple of ground rules on the screen, as you can see. So we want this to be a really sort of participatory and engaging session today. So questions are really welcome. Do make use of the chat and using the virtual raise hand feature on Zoom to signify that you might want to ask a question out loud. If you're not speaking, we ask that you kindly keep yourself on mute. And as I think you should, I'm sure you know, the event is being recorded, and we will share the recording in our follow-up email, which will be along with resources that we're going to be chatting through today and a short feedback survey that we would love you to complete, because that would be really helpful for us. So let's get into it. Right. So first of all, why are we here today and what are we going to be talking about? So over the next sort of hour and a half-ish, we'll be taking a deep dive into MPC's evaluation of Templeton World Charity Foundation's education initiative, Big Questions in Classrooms. So essentially, we're here today to discuss the achievements of the programme, Big Questions in Classrooms, which, by the way, for the rest of the event, we'll probably be referring to it as Be Quick. So just to clarify, that's what we mean. We're going to be discussing how improvements happen in education and discussing and learning how to prove those changes. So over our evaluation at MPC, we found out a lot about what it means to drive change in the education system, as you can sort of see some of that outlined on the screen in our lovely diagram on the right-hand side. And so we'll be getting into more of this today, but please do, if you haven't already, have a read of our evaluation report, which Tom has kindly popped into the chat to explore even more detail. So a quick introduction to what our evaluation report is all about. Our aim for the evaluation was to explore the achievements and also the challenges experienced throughout the Big Questions in Classrooms programme for a range of different audiences and stakeholders. So we were exploring not only what changes happened and continue to happen, but essentially how they happened and what factors enabled those changes and what factors presented potential barriers to change. Our public report is organised by messages for different audiences, as you can see on the screen. So really, this is a cross-sector evaluation report. So whether you're here today as a teacher, as an academic, policymaker, charity funder, etc., you are very welcome here today. And yeah, thank you so much for joining. So just really quickly, as we have people from a range of sectors here with us today, lots of you may know us at MPC, but we're well aware that lots of you may have no idea who MPC is. So just quickly, we are a charity think tank and consultancy working to increase the impact of the social sector through our work with everyone from frontline charities to funders to policymakers as well. Our kind of core activities fit into these three headings, or as we sometimes refer to them as the three I's. So we innovate through creating models, frameworks, and ways of thinking to drive change in the sector. We aim to improve the impact of charities and funders by providing tools, resources, and services to help them work as effectively as possible. And lastly, we influence using data, research, our voice, and our convening power to influence the sector's thinking and to put the work of the charity sector, so the causes it champions and solutions that it offers, higher in the minds of policymakers. So that is us at MPC. And now onto the more exciting stuff. So I'm about to hand over to Bonnie from Templeton to introduce kind of in more detail the Be Quick initiative. And then we'll be hearing from our fantastic speakers, which we're so lucky to have joined us today. So Barry Billingsley from the Epistemic Insight Initiative, who will be joined by teachers Michelle Lawson, Murray Wilkinson, and Nicola Robinson, who were involved in the Epistemic Insight project. We'll also be hearing from Catherine Wright, the lead of the RE Exchange conferences. We'll then end by some further discussion from myself and Tom about a bit more detail of the evaluation, the successes and the learnings that we found. Again, we really want this to be as participatory as possible, so please do ask questions, make use of the chat, and enjoy. So Bonnie, over to you.
Thank you, Lily. Hi, everybody. My name is Bonnie Zahl, and I have, since 2017, been an external advisor to Templeton World Charity Foundation. I'm going to give a little bit of background about the foundation and then a little bit of history about the Big Questions in Classrooms initiative. Templeton World Charity Foundation, or TWCF for short, was established by philanthropist John Templeton, who was particularly interested in how scientific research might provide knowledge and insights about the world that inspire deeper consideration of bigger questions relating to topics like the human search for meaning, whether there's purpose in the universe, the nature of morality and goodness, and human understanding of the divine, and so on. Topics that are usually seen as not really within the remit of the sciences. But John Templeton promoted the discovery of knowledge and information that would help make progress in understanding the deepest realities of human nature and the physical world. And I believe that these subjects needed to be discussed and considered as societies progress. And so the foundations that he established fund interdisciplinary research that addresses these big questions, activities that encourage the public to engage with big questions, as well as a number of other areas like freedom and entrepreneurship and character development. So I have served as a program advisor external to the foundation since 2017. And Big Questions in Classrooms was really motivated by John Templeton's interest in thinking beyond the confines of the scientific boundaries of knowledge production. But it was also informed and motivated by some research by Professor Billingsley, whom you'll hear from later, that suggests students sometimes develop a view that religion or philosophy and these big questions and science are in conflict because of some implicit messages they get from their teachers that they communicated in schools. Often teachers of science don't permit big questions being asked in the science classroom because they are seen as off topic. Religious education teachers are sometimes not confident in responding to questions about religion and science or philosophy and science. And of course, subjects are often taught in silos. We have separate classrooms, separate lessons, separate teachers. And even when these boundaries or these silos are not present, how different ways of knowing and different types of knowledge offered by subjects is not really addressed. So even when they're in the same classroom, we don't really get to the how do they relate to each other. Programs that attempt to bridge different ways of knowing, especially how knowledge works in the sciences, in contrast with how knowledge works in religious education and other humanities, typically tend to happen outside of formal lesson time. So Templeton World Charity Foundation thought it would be an ambitious experiment to think about and to do something about getting more integrated interdisciplinary thinking into formal education. The foundation issued 2 rounds of calls for proposals for projects that tried to move the needle on this, and they were guided by 3 goals. First was to develop a robust research and evidence base of best practices in teaching about how knowledge works, especially in science education and in religious education. Second, the goal was to provide high quality and innovative training, implementation strategies, and resources for teachers for how to do this effectively in their classroom. And lastly, there was a goal to make valuable contributions to national conversations in England and hopefully in the UK about education enhancement in science and RE and beyond. We didn't want this science and religion, science and big questions to be a niche thing. We really wanted this. We believed that there was something bigger to offer to education through thinking about big questions. And so I and the foundation really wanted to see if we could not only do a little niche thing in science and RE, but get the education sector to think more broadly about innovation and about big questions. So at this point, Lily, if you could pull up the TWCF website, I would really encourage those of you who are listening in today to have a look at Templeton World Charity Foundation's website to see what the foundation has actually funded in big questions in classrooms. Sorry, Lily, can you pull up the screen share of the TWCF website? So if you go on the TWCF website, you will find, if you poke around a little bit, you will see that there's a section of the page that of the website that has a projects database, and in that you can filter grants by the big questions in classrooms priority. There's also a section on the website that is a resource hub that provides links to open access outputs from all of the grantees. And likewise, you can filter out to look for the outputs from big questions in classrooms grantees. If you look through that, you'll see that the foundation has funded some projects to provide scholarship and empirical research on different ways to bring science and big questions into the classrooms. But we recognize that scholarship, research alone was not enough, and that we needed to get these knowledge and tools into the hands of people who will actually do the hard work of forming young minds. But we also realize that that is also not enough, because we know there are factors beyond educators' control that affect what they do and how they do it in schools: resources, leadership, national guidelines, policies. So the three big questions in classroom goals reflect the recognition that there are indeed many factors at work that influence what children learn, how they learn, and the outcomes of their education experience. And all of that, of course, affects teachers' actions and behaviors and what they do in the classroom. So we were particularly interested in whether our interests, which is to encourage students to grapple with big questions and their ability to discern different ways of knowing, might relate to learning outcomes that are more familiar to educators, like critical thinking, ability to confidently engage with the process of inquiry and learning, or positive attitudes towards learning. And therefore, we commissioned New Philanthropy NPC to do an independent evaluation of the whole initiative. How successful has Templeton funded projects been in achieving those three goals? And I would so encourage you to look at their learning report, because I think there are implications of what they've learned in evaluating and looking at the entire portfolio as a whole. There are implications of that for other other activities that are trying to approach education in a more holistic and in a more innovative way. Especially the NPC report has this lovely visual representation of various enablers and barriers to achieving big questions in classroom goals. I suspect some of those enablers and barriers may be relevant for other learning goals. And more importantly, I would encourage all of you to engage with the presenters who are here today, who have been on the ground, who have been teaching and observing and learning and measuring and trying in various ways to help their colleagues and their students become more confident and better equipped to think about big questions in classrooms. So thank you for being here, and back to you, Lily. You're on mute.
Sorry, back now. Oh. Tom is going to take over. Thank you so much, Bonnie, for the introduction to big questions in classrooms. And yes, over to
hopefully not to take over, but I just wanted to join in and with what you just said, Bonnie, and to reiterate that this event, it's in the middle of the election period. People are busy. It's a beautiful day, but I think it's a stepping stone, it's a starting point um, for spreading some of these messages a bit more widely, with quite a bit of synergy between what Templeton is trying to achieve, but also I think there's a real partnership with what we're trying to achieve, and that we've kind of like experienced through this wonderful project to get those messages out more broadly about how to promote change in education and what good education looks like, and then also just more widely how the methods you can use, the tools and approaches you can take to have that impact. So this is hopefully the first of many times that this goes out into the wild, and we start to talk to people like you and get some of these messages out. Thanks so much, Bonnie. And our first case study speaker is Berry Billingsley, joined by Michelle, Murray, and Nicola, who have worked on the Epistemic Insight Initiative for around 3 or 4 years, I believe, and they will, I'm sure, tell you all about it. And really interested. Please do pipe up with your interjections as well. Let's get discussions going, because I'm sure this is, we'll not all agree, and we'll want to join in. So over to you, Berry.
Oh, Berry, sorry, I think you're just
Right, there we go. I've got it now. On mute. Yeah, when I remember now that you've given that introduction, Bonnie, there was a meeting in Oxford when we brought people together and we said what this project, this Be Quick, might be about. And you were good enough to invite me to give a little talk there. And I said, isn't it frustrating that whenever you hear from the sort of the great scientists, they always say, but it wasn't because of school. I didn't do this because of school. It happened because of something else that happened, or they were the ones that didn't fit into school. So if that's the route that so many scientists came along before, then I think one of the big impacts of Be Quick is that that's not going to be the future. So the future will be that those magnificent scientists and others who come forward into public prominence because of the amazing things that they achieve will come through school, and that is the difference between a classroom that is following a very prescriptive description of what they're studying, right down to the little tiniest detail of the knowledge that needs to be put into children's heads. And then we lift the lid on their heads and ask them in a test to recite what they've memorized. That's the old days. The new days are, well, we know that's not going to last anyway, because the technology in children's hands now mean that they can already start to explore the big questions that interest them. And if it's not happening in school, it's going to be happening on their computers. And as a parent, part educator, part scientist, I would rather they were exploring through the scaffolding of school, where I know that they're going to be supported and helped to the best resources and the best ways to approach these questions, rather than, wonderful though the experience may be, they're sitting like hermits on their computers late into the night, having their conversations with ChatGPT, because it's the only space where they get to ask their big questions. So I just have this big question for you, which is, what is a big question to you? Because again, so much for the assumptions that you form when you're in your own niche. I assumed everybody meant the same thing by big question. And then when I started to talk to people in different disciplines, there is definitely a kind of a commonality about it, but it does change a little bit. I'm just trying to go down the slides, actually, and it's not going down. I'm not quite sure. We seem to be stuck on my first slide at the moment. I might have to abandon mine and ask you to do.
Berry, if you hover at the bottom of
there we are.
Yeah.
Either somebody else did that for me or I did that. So for me, big questions are about the nature of reality, meanings of being, what it means to be unique. But when I asked my computer scientist colleague, you might like their definition better, but I think you can kind of see that there's a sort of a central thought here as to what a big question is. But there's definitely the tone of a sort of an engineer about this one, isn't there? And this is the computer scientist and engineer. And then when you look at mine, there's sort of the quest for knowledge and the physicist and the educator coming across. So I challenge you now, when you walk away from today's session, or you can put it into the chat, to come up with what is a big question for you. And then I was intrigued to see the definition of big questions that's put in the front of the evaluation report, which I approve of. So, I think lots of ways of talking about big questions are all good. And then another piece of research that we have yet to do, although we've started to write this up now, what big questions do mean to our young people who will be the next inventors, discoverers, and so forth. And I don't think we'll be waiting for them now to finish their education. I think the tools that are in classrooms will mean that the next big discovery may well come from a classroom where those young people are thinking outside the box and asking the questions that we've taught ourselves not to ask. So now, having said that we are in the very capable hands of our educators, we're going to meet 3 educators who I have a lot of time for, who are the co-creators of our project. So there's epistemic insight, but you don't need that. I go on about that all the time. So here we are. So Michelle, I'm going to invite you to start, and I'm just going to stop sharing the screen. Oh no, I think somebody else is sharing controlling my screen now, which is wonderful. So yeah, there we go. Thank you.
Thank you, Berry, and it's really a great pleasure to be here this afternoon. I'm Michelle Lawson. I'm head teacher of Wilmington Grammar School for Girls, which is near Dartford, for those of you who've not heard of us before. And we became involved with the project working with Canterbury Christchurch and the Laser team to look at developing a Year 7 curriculum, looking at being epistemically insightful. And the aim for us when we began this project was to just work with Year 7 and to develop those interdisciplinary skills and to look at where it took us. And my goodness me, I could not have anticipated where it has taken us. We now are at a position where we're looking to say, actually, we want to create epistemic insight schools. We've gone beyond Year 7 because the work we've done on our curriculum has been transformative with our students. It's been transformative in terms of growing students, but also giving them the skills to navigate an ever more complex and diverse world and curriculum. And as I said at the beginning, I'm a head teacher in a girls' grammar school, which brings with it the pressures of being in selective education and that expectation from students and parents that they're going to do lots and lots of individual subjects. So actually bringing this into the curriculum needed some creativity and some thought. But we saw the impact carried out as part of the Big Questions initiative with our Year 7s. And we started from there to say, what else can we do? So some 3 years later, we now have an entire Key Stage 3 curriculum mapped to disciplinary questions and big questions. It opens the debate and it continues the skills development throughout Years 7 to 9. In fact, our Year 9 students are about to present their first Socratic dialogues this year, which I'm looking forward to hearing. The school is full of student responses on the walls to the question that they begin with in Year 7, which is what makes us human? And the discussion and debate can be seen and heard tangibly around the corridors. The students have had the opportunity to present to academics as well as their parents and teachers, trustees and governors, and that's grown their confidence and their ability to defend an argument. And some of the work from our Year 7s was truly impressive. As head teacher, the greatest impact came for me when I allowed my staff team to develop the curriculum alongside the team from Christchurch, Canterbury. They supported the first iteration of the programme. And the impact for me only really became evident this year. We decided we would map the entire curriculum and each individual subject area would have its own individual disciplinary question for each term, with an overarching disciplinary question for the term that all students had. That was a plan that we put in place to have ready for September 2025. I spoke to the staff at the beginning of September 2023, and it's already in place. It's already in place because this is so much embedded into the language, culture and learning of the school that when I asked the staff to do it, they knew exactly what we needed to do. They were already having the conversations and they produced the resources. The report acknowledges this learning, and I'm really pleased that it's there, that too often as leaders, and I'm one of them, we try and control too much in schools, that our focus is rightly on passing exams, but actually when we take risks with what we do, the benefits are far bigger than we imagined. and the impact on that performance only goes up. One of my regrets, and I look back now, is that I decided not to do any tracking as far as achievement was concerned, because the work wasn't about that, and it's never been about that. However, I do know that every year our grades have gone up and up. The other key piece of learning, I think, from the work that we've done was that whilst the material was really challenging, and deliberately so, its ability to be adapted to a varied audience ensured it's not a one-size-fits-all. And one of my local alternative provisions units wants to use the resources we've produced adapted to work with them because of the questions it raises and the ability the students have to navigate it. So has all this made a difference? Well, when one of my most vulnerable students told me that EI had helped them recognise there's more than one answer to any situation, and that was also true of mental health and all the things they were grappling with, I knew I had a curriculum that does more than just ask big questions. It gives students the power to answer them for themselves in ways we never, ever imagined. So we're heading into now our next iteration. Here comes Key Stage 4. Thank you.
That's fantastic. Thank you. As a segue to Murray, who's got some slides, by the way, when we get back to slides. As a segue to Murray, when I came to the session, one of the sessions that you put on with the students there, the students are native speakers of interdisciplinarity and big questions. It's so interesting to hear how when students grow up with it and it's just in the language around them, they don't stop. And the way they could make connections as you have a conversation with them was, as a researcher, it was scary because I felt like, you know, I was a novice language learner and I could kind of pedantically and carefully step my way between what it means to think like a scientist and then what it means to think like an artist. And they were asking the question and doing it in just talking about their posters. It came so naturally. They were literally thinking on another level to the level that we've learned to think about. So we're going to hear next, I think, from Murray, who's going to give. But Tom, do you have a question? Because I see your hand is up.
Yeah. Yes, hope you can hear me okay. Yes, Barry, I thought that was a really interesting observation that it was particularly related to a particular school, I think, and that's got the part that I get excited about is like, what were the biggest predictors of successful initiatives like this to increase interdisciplinary learning, get that sense of wonder and curiosity in the children? And we also found that, as you mentioned, schools that schools themselves, their culture, their leadership were quite a big kind of predictor qualitatively about how successful those programs were. Just to reflect on what you said there.
Absolutely, because this is all about empowerment and agency and giving people the space to stretch the boundary beyond the discipline in order that they can understand the discipline. And the irony and the sort of misperceptions that grow in schools if you work in very tightly defined subjects is that the children never ask the question that really it does help them to think interdisciplinarity. And I agree, I saw that in the report, Tom, that having head teacher support is going to be so important. Two of the people here speaking on about the Epistemic Insight Initiative are head teachers, well, vice principal and head teachers, but actually it's Murray, classroom teacher, who we're going to hear from next, who's at the sort of the chalk face, except that we don't use chalk anymore, but the chalk face of what this really looks like when you're doing it. So impact from the leadership and then impact in the classroom. As I say, Murray's got some slides. I think somebody was sharing my slides more successfully than I was before. Do you need me to share again, or?
If you could, Barry, that would be fantastic. Hopefully we can give you a hand if needed. It's looking good.
It's just that it doesn't seem to go down when I try and page down. So I can put the slides there, but I don't seem to have any control over. Here we go. This should be your first slide, Murray. There we are. That's your first slide. Are you mute, Murray? Because we can't hear you. Or have you dropped out.
Looks like Murray's dropped out. Maybe if we could come back.
That sounds like a good plan. Let's go to, so Nikki, I might ask you to go next and then come back to this.
Absolutely, no problem. And it might help introduce Murray as well at the same time. So we'll kill two birds. So my name's Nikki, or Nicola Robinson, and I'm the Vice Principal and also, maybe relevant, a chemistry teacher. So I do a bit of chalk face as well, Barry. You'll be very pleased to know, I'm sure, at the Worthgate School, which is an international boarding school in Canterbury, in Kent. And our students are aged between 13 and 18, sometimes even up to 20. And the students study GCSEs, A-level, importantly, the International Baccalaureate Diploma Programme. And also we do a university foundation programme. One of our goals is really to disseminate the ethos of the IB diploma programme across the whole school, as we really invest really heavily in metacognition in terms of upskilling not only staff, but students as well. And the diploma programme has something called, you might have heard of the theory of knowledge, the TOK. And that really actively encourages students to think deeply about knowledge acquisition and assimilation. And therefore, we think explicit instruction regarding interdisciplinary and EI awareness enables our students to both interrogate knowledge and to appreciate how the context can affect how knowledge is both interpreted and applied. So, to that effect, we've embraced the use of what I call Barry's disciplinary wheel. In fact, you can probably see maybe in the background, there's one behind me, so I am absolutely owning the message here. And we put these wheels in high footfall areas around the whole school, and both students and staff are encouraged to think about a question every week, which we consider big questions, although I'm now beginning to feel a little bit naughty in terms of what the big questions maybe we've been proposing based on what you've said a little bit earlier, Barry. But things like what it means to be human, are people fundamentally good? What is language? Because most of our students are EAL students, so language has all sorts of connotations, and to us it is more of a big question than maybe to other schools. And then ashamedly, I have to say, we have had a question called, should we eat chocolate? But if you think about the ethics around that and the sociological kind of perspectives, then I think we can have that as a big question, possibly. We can squeeze that one in. We've also developed we've kind of flipped things around in terms of how to turn small questions into big questions, because we think that sometimes in classrooms, and thinking me specifically as a chemistry teacher, I'm teaching something so very, very what seems absolutely only answered by chemistry, but then we really broaden it out and think, well, how could this be applied to all other areas? So that's been something that's been really interested, and hearing the student language around that, they've really embraced that. And as I said before, because we're an EAL school, more than 90% of our students are EAL, we've used the wheel to explore language and even look at like words to think about what does that word mean? What does the stem mean in different languages? And also that actually goes into disciplines as well. So the word cell, for example, is a classic in terms of how that could get interpreted, both in the way it's spelt and actually, you know, the meaning in terms of science and all sorts of other meanings. So all of this, we feel, is hugely beneficial in developing a student's awareness around where they get their knowledge from, and it empowers them to think about making decisions on their knowledge. So thinking about the future then, I'm also really interested in the work that Barry has been doing around AI. IB students, you might know, are actively encouraged by the IB to be curious, to be critical, and to challenge the status quo regarding their education. And in fact, the IB is excited about the opportunities that AI brings to education. And that might be contrary, actually, to probably every other area of education. We were quite fearful of AI. But interestingly enough as well, they don't really propose any ways in which that we can or IB students can kind of challenge this, and particularly around the term bias. So that's an area that I would love to do more research on, and particularly with Barry, in terms of looking at student agency on what I would call knowledge security. So developing maybe workshops to model how to scrutinize the legitimacy of knowledge and to gauge the level of bias. And maybe we could provide some careful case studies to support this. I'm very keen as a scientist as well to measure impact. And so I think this could be measured via student surveys, both before and after very carefully designed workshops, etc. But I really feel this is an important area to do diligence on, as students, as Berry said earlier, get most of their knowledge via their electronic devices. So that has implications on them assimilating general knowledge, but actually online safety in general. So I think EI and AI could be classed as co-collaborators here with infinite prospects. I feel the EI ideology can be responsive to technological advances and therefore can support an area that is currently perceived by educators as rather scary. And I think I shall leave it at that point. If anyone has any questions, obviously I'm open to them.
That's brilliant. Well, we said we collected the questions just at the end of our bit, but please put questions in the chat as well, and then we can also pick them up directly. So I know Murray is back now, but as ever, I'm so tempted to say a couple of things. I think the bias is amazing. One of the things that's so interesting at the moment is getting interdisciplinary groups together in HE, which I've been exploring just a little bit, and how those two different groups, the scientists and the writers, the humanities, understand the word bias. Because in science, when you get bias, and I'm speaking to those that know, but in science, when you get bias, as often as not, it's because you've forgotten to get data from a particular space. So, for example, you've sent your recording devices out during the daytime and forgot to measure what happens at night. So bias creeps in inadvertently into the data. And I think the bringing together of those two many different perspectives on the word bias is yeah, I agree with you. Will help those young minds to think more creatively and more interdisciplinarily than we have. Right, so I'm now going to put Murray's slides back and hand over to Murray. Okay, there we go.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can somebody wave or give me a nod if you can hear me?
We can
Excellent.
hear you.
There
We can't see you, but that might be a good thing. That
yes. Well, yeah, it definitely fine by me. Thank you all for rolling with it as my Zoom crashed. So, sort of slight nostalgia for days gone by. Let's not talk about that. So yes, thank you so much for the opportunity. Again, just to share some of what we've been doing at the Worthgate School. I didn't hear everything Nicola said, so if I repeat anything she said, it's just because it's that exciting. So yes, my name is Murray. I'm a physics teacher at the Worthgate School in Canterbury, and I first encountered epistemic insight as a PGCE student when I met Professor Billingsley, which was the opportunity just to, the world was kind of opened up to me as somebody going into the sciences to teach physics. But I had spent 15 years or so working in the field of religion, working for the Church of England, even though I am really a scientist. So I was so excited to find like-minded people who were pushing this boundary between these two parts, certainly of my life, that I'd been wanting to bring together. And I recognized through exploring the Epistemic Insight Initiative and the ideas in it, that it's something I'd always been doing, trying to see, well, how can we talk about, for what I had been doing, what it means to be church from a scientific perspective. And so coming into school and learning, in terms of our pedagogy and what it is we're trying to do as educators, this idea of subject fragmentation that Berry so beautifully brings, it really caught my imagination, because it is what we do because of the need of curricula, because of timetables, because we have all most of us chosen a subject to teach, and we think we better stick to those tick boxes and stick between the lines, and don't color too messily. And so we have this result that we've been speaking about. So I was very excited to be challenged to blur the boundaries to find ways to make our classroom walls permeable, which is what is really at the heart of epistemic insight. There's on the next slide, there's a quote from one of the epistemic research articles that says, if we can go to the next slide, can I do it?
It's just that not very responsive, but it might suddenly
That's
go.
fine. Oh, that's fine. I'll keep going. The question is really, how does a student know what kind of question they're being asked to answer? How do you know it's a science question? And the answer in school is, well, it's in my science book. Oh, it was asked by my science teacher. And that's really, I mean, I find that quite it's not fully depressing, but it's a challenge. I think I don't want students to need to think in these very rigid, narrow terms. I would love for them to be able to say, oh, well, I know that's a science question because science asks questions like this, or I know that, I know it's a history question because it has elements of history within it. And that is really what epistemic insight is trying to bring, is to find an outcome, I suppose, that is how can we help our students to be able to reach for the right skills to answer the questions they may face. And it may be that they're facing a science question and they might need some science skills to answer that question. But most of the big questions they will face probably, and I would say always, cannot be answered with one set of skills. And so what I love about Epistemic Insights, the initiative, is that it is trying to frame what it means to approach big questions from these different disciplinary standpoints. And because our students are expected to move from one, certainly from one subject to another, and we would use the language of largely from one discipline to another, that means that they are asked to change the way that they answer questions, the way that they think about things, and probably the way that they use their knowledge. They have to change from lesson to lesson, from classroom to classroom. So the next slide has a, actually I can't remember what's on the next slide. I think we're going to the discipline wheel at this point. So this is really the challenge. And at Worthgate School, what I have been given the amazing opportunity to do is to spend a little bit of time each week actually trying to explore with colleagues how we might use this discipline wheel is one of the tools within the Epistemic Insight initiative, how we might use this tool to help our students to identify how they can use different skill sets, different knowledge sets, different epistemologies to answer the questions that they might face. And so one of my favorites is, why did the Titanic sink? And immediately I want to answer from a physics perspective, but there's an economic answer, there's a historical answer, there's a philosophical answer, a psychological answer, many ways of approaching these questions. We have also been very fortunate that the school has invested, and I wonder if Nicola's mentioned this already, but we have these, our very own versions of the discipline wheel up around school, and a few portable ones that we can move between classrooms. And it also, because it's not the proper one, it really worried me at first. I thought, oh, are we going to get in trouble? We're not using the Epistemic Insight discipline wheel. But I'm very pleased to be able to say, as the report points out, that Barry has given us this beautiful autonomy to take these ideas and make it our own, which we have. And so we have a very large one of these in a very prominent place in one of the corridors. And so from time to time, I'll go and change the question in the middle, and students and staff will engage and write sometimes, humorous, but sometimes interesting comments to say how have they approached the perspective. I've been working with a small group of staff to get them to try and explore what this idea might look like in a classroom. And my main focus hasn't been yet what is the outcomes that we will find for our students, because that is really going to be a long-term question. The focus I've had this year is really to work with staff to find out what are the barriers that they face themselves, in terms of, if we just say to them, here is a discipline wheel, use it in your classroom. Many of them were very excited by the idea, but as soon as they were then faced with, oh wait, which lesson should I put it in? How does that next lesson on kind of a niche economic point of view, how is that going to become a big question? And so what we've been discovering as I've been meeting with the staff towards the end of the year to sort of say how has it gone, to reiterate, as the report rightly points out, that teacher time is the biggest barrier. Staff having enough time to sit and think ahead to be able to put this in place is always going to be a challenge. But the other challenge that I found was helping staff to find the right question to even attempt to get the students to engage with those disciplinary perspectives. And I think what I'm coming to sort of find, and we're just sort of writing this up hopefully soon, as we just kind of finish the year off, is I'm wondering if what we might need is for our staff to focus on what they're expert at. So the thing I struggle with when I'm engaging with the discipline wheel is I'm not sure that I'm analyzing the big question from a historian point of view correctly, because I don't have the historian's training. I'm not an historian. I'm a scientist, and so we've been tried. What I've been using from the epistemic initiative is these discipline characteristics. So to say, how would any discipline, as they're on the screen, what are the questions they would ask? What are the methods that each discipline would use? And my favorite, the norms of thought. How does an English scholar think? How does an artist think in terms of their knowledge base? But that's very hard for staff to do, never mind our students, when they've been trained in one of these disciplines. And I've been wondering, and I haven't yet had this conversation with Barry, but the focus that I think we're heading towards is to say, what if we focused on explicitly teaching in terms of our discipline characteristics, the epistemology of each subject, so that when we're teaching, not just to meet the curriculum and get through the content, but to along the way be saying to our students, by the way, this is how a scientist will approach this thinking. We use this method, we end up with this way of thinking. That's how our knowledge is formed. And for in the next lesson for the economics teacher to be saying, well, actually, these are the kinds of questions that an economist will ask. This is the method an economist will use. This is how an economist thinks. So that our students are getting that explicitly. And alongside that, if we are then helping them to explore these big questions using something like a discipline wheel, I'm wondering if that's a way of bridging that gap between not knowing what another expert might want to ask. And to help with that, very excited. I've been watching this development for a little while with Barry, that there is now, through the Epistemic Insight Initiative, an online discipline wheel. So it's powered by generative AI, and there are a few questions that are loaded onto the website, and that website on the screen is the one that works. So you can choose a question, and you can select disciplines from the wheel, and it will give you an AI generative perspective. So using these three characteristics of the disciplines will give you an answer saying, well, this is how psychology will answer the questions a psychologist will ask.
So
These are the norms of thought.
I'm just conscious about time. I appreciate.
Yes, that
That
was me.
Thank
I was
you,
ending there.
Mary,
That was
I'll
the last.
interrupt you. I'll interrupt you because actually, if you don't mind, that's a brilliant
No,
segue
I was
for
done.
me.
That was the last. That was the last
I'll
point.
take over. So if you go to the next slide, I think we should be on. There we go. So well, there we go. This one here. So this is just taking it forward. So listening to what Mary was saying there, it's lifting students' thinking to a different level, which I think will be as the way that we solve the next big questions, and is indeed what John Templeton said about how we will solve the next big questions. So getting students to think at the epistemic level and not at the level of facts. And I noticed in the reports that facts comes up a couple of times. It comes up both in RE and it comes up for science. And the battle between facts is just polarizing. There's nowhere to go. A fact is a fact. You can't argue with a fact. But if you're thinking epistemologically, then you're open to knowledge changing. And that's something that we say in education anyway, and yet we struggle so much to teach it to children. So I've got two last slides to bring you. This is the challenge, go back one slide. This is the challenge I used to present when I was teaching physics. I used to say to the students, this is a photograph. What's wrong? What's puzzling you about this photograph? And they'd say things like, "Oh, the arrow's pointed to the wrong place," or all sorts of things. And then I would say, "And where is the camera that took the photograph?" But that was the thing they didn't think to ask. Where's the camera? So apparently we've managed to get a camera right outside, not just our solar system, but apparently outside our galaxy, to look back at our galaxy to tell us what it looks like. And yet they assume that because this is a picture that they see in their science books, it's a fact. So this is a fact. This is what our galaxy looks like. And if I ask them, how do you know? They seem to think at the same time that we could manage to get a camera out into space and see it because they're used to photographic evidence. So that's the questions that we grew up with. Now, the next questions that I notice are important now. So I put the same thing back to you. What are some of the puzzling things about this photo? So first of all, is it even real? Well, we've just seen a photo that wasn't real, as I say, before, a modelling photo. So perhaps we're not blown away simply by the fact that, hey, it's another model, and yet it's presented to us as though it's real. But look at the power of AI to see into the reality that we have captured. So what you're seeing here isn't a photo, it's what we find interesting when we take photos. So you're seeing the world, when you look at it through the world of AI, you're seeing the world as we see it. You're not seeing the original world. And for scientists, I think that's such an important question. So if you were to do your science through the eyes of AI, then you've removed yourself from making observations in the real world. And instead of that, you're only looking at the observations that we've already thought are important to say. So you can already see that you're going to miss out on making that next big discovery. But if our students can both use AI to look, as you said, Murray, across the tops of the disciplines to see into them all, and at the same time, remember that at the heart of science is our own curiosity. When we look firsthand using our senses at nature, then how amazingly fast they will make that discovery that we haven't even thought of yet. So epistemically insightful young people will know that they can't move away from making their direct observations, as well as using the tools that are put into their hands by wonderful educators. So there we go. That's me done.
Great. And just to check, is there anyone left to speak, or does anybody want to raise a question for Barry before I introduce the next speaker, Catherine Wright? Any questions? No? Catherine, are you happy to unmute yourself, and over to you to talk about, we thought we'd get quite a nice balance here between what you can see as the extremely passionate kind of coal face of it with Berry and her colleagues who have been really closely involved in the classroom, seeing the kids' responses. And then Catherine here, part of the portfolio of Be Quick was also to look at that much higher level. And this one should be in quite strong contrast, looking at how you bring the teachers together to think about the bigger system and the bigger picture of what's going on in schools, and how that can be part of that approach to disseminating how knowledge works. I hope that's a good introduction, Catherine.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. And I should say that Berry and so I don't think some of her team presented at the first of the RE Exchange conferences, and I'll come to a bit more about that, how it connected with the wider Be Quick projects in a minute. Thank you so much. I feel very privileged because there's amazing projects as part of this, the whole Be Quick initiative. And ours was quite small, really, in comparison to others. We had we thought it was a good amount of funding, but in relation to other people, it was quite a small amount of funding. And it continues as well. So I'll come to that. So let me explain what RE Exchange is. You're seeing the strapline there, real world research for real world classrooms. And the idea of this conference actually came from my predecessor. So I've been in post just over 5 years. And about 5.5 years ago or so, he came up with the idea of having a research conference. When I sort of landed in the job, we decided to review a little bit about the aims and objectives of the conference and how it would run. Little did we know at that point as well that the conference would have to move online. The conference was originally planned to be in person in Birmingham, but it moved to be online because of COVID in 2020. So there were some quite significant changes in terms of the aims and objectives of the conference and so on. And very early on, when I started in my job, I met with Bonnie, and just to talk funder to funder at that point, but learned a lot more about Be Quick and the aims and objectives of that, and felt that actually this could be something that could really contribute to the bigger questions that the initiative was exploring. So RE Exchange turned out to be a free online conference, and we undenied what to call it, and it became known as, and it still is known as, RE Exchange, because we wanted to be an exchange between researchers, particularly those in higher education, and practitioners in the field of what we're calling religion and worldviews. You might know that as RE, or if you're from Wales, RVE, or Scotland, RME, or any other variation you want to call it. And the idea was to exchange knowledge at this event. So those working in HE might share their research, practitioners who are working in the field, if you like, particularly masters or doctoral students who are teachers in schools who are doing research, might share their research. But also we particularly wanted to share research where teachers and those in HE were working together and co-constructing research. One of the wider original aims was also to change the narrative around research and RE. Sort of 5 years ago, the narrative, I don't think, might be my personal opinion, but I think I can probably safely say, as someone who's kind of quite well versed in what's going on in the community, that research was not really talked about very much. There were some specific projects. Yes, people were doing masters and doctoral studies, but research was not really being talked about in the wider RE community at that point. And so we wanted to change the narrative, and that's very hard to measure, and I'll come back to that in a minute. And so we came up with this strapline, Real World Research for Real World Classrooms. And in 2020, we had 188 actual attendees on the event days. It was held over 2 days. And then in 2022, because we built on the first conference, and I'll explain that in a minute, we had 333 actual attendees, and actually we reached our maximum number of registration at 500, although obviously, as you could see, not everyone turned up, and there were learning points around that, which I'll come to. And the online conference, basically in 2022, we basically had it from a lunchtime on a Friday to a lunchtime on a Saturday, with a lot of thought being given to what were the best times for everyone. And the 2022 one particularly built on feedback from the first one, which had been 2 full days, including an evening as well. So we had a mixture of keynotes, panel sessions, workshops, seminar style, what you would find at any kind of online conference, really. And so in terms of fulfilling the Be Quick aims, the conference was kind of interdisciplinary in nature. So you'll see my comment a moment ago about theology and religious studies as being 2 different disciplines. But also we had people coming up with philosophy backgrounds, with other social science backgrounds, political science, psychology, and so on, contributing to the conference. We wanted it to be a real exchange of knowledge, so teachers really being able to listen and learn from those in academia, and vice versa as well, and researchers who are in academia being able to learn from teachers in the classroom. As I mentioned, we wanted to showcase some of the Be Quick projects, and we've actually, I think, showcased a significant number of them. And I think we're continuing to do that actually in the one coming up in this autumn. And we wanted to contribute to the national conversation about what is religion and worldviews, what is the best ways of being able to practice that, what's the best research in the field taking place at the moment, and how can we share that. And we have, certainly in the last conference, had international attention being given to the conference as well. And this coming year, picking up on the AI theme, we have an international speaker as well, speaking about AI as part of the conference. So we wanted to be able to contribute, but also be able to now learn from international perspectives. And as I have said, we wanted to support this kind of culture shift, this change of narrative regarding both research and also around epistemic literacy as well. So the first conference in 2020, we did significant evaluation of this event. So we had a survey that we put out to all those that had attended, and we also ran some focus groups, and MPC also did some one-to-one interviews, I think of that one, but certainly of the second one as well. And the Net Promoter Score was really good. People commented on it being well organised, conceptually interesting, the good quality of speakers, a variety of sessions and so on. And there was evidence to suggest that it kind of created a bit of a pivotal moment within the community for researcher practitioner collaboration and connection. What I mean by that is that maybe I'm slightly biased, but when I look back, something happens, I think, in that moment, on that day, and then subsequent things are not all down to us by any means, or the subsequent RE Exchange conferences, but I think it made a difference in terms of shifting people's ideas, and also, I think, in raising the profile of research in RE full stop. There were some things that we needed to learn from that conference. There were some presenters who were less experienced, where the evaluations were not so positive. I'll come to how we then looked at supporting them in the future. And because we'd moved from it being an in-person conference to an online conference, there were some significant tech issues in the background. It was quite stressful for those of us in the background, and my colleague, Tracy, at the time. So we wanted to iron out those things. And also, interestingly, people said they would have valued a plenary session. So we thought about that as well. And here's just a couple of lovely quotes from the survey. I won't read them, but you can read them. But one of them, the first one there, I really love it, saying that it was inclusive. They felt that it was for anyone, encouraging grassroots of primary people as well as secondary teachers. And then this sense of the theory and practice being connected, perhaps for the first time. So we then were very grateful to Templeton for then funding a second conference in 2022 to build on the first one. And this time we set up a steering group prior to the conference to help us to plan it. And one of the key things of doing that was to bring the religion and worldviews community together more strategically. So this became an additional aim of the project. And in the steering group, we had people who were working in HE, so representatives from TRS UK, for example, but also representatives from NATRE, the National Association of Teachers of RE. And so this became a really important part of the project, as well as actually the conference itself. And you can see that the Net Promoter Score from the survey went up. And again, there were similar positive comments being made, particularly about the style and the focus on collaboration and connecting people together. There was a sense of needing to support teachers to apply research to the classroom a bit more. So there were a couple of sessions or one contribution in particular, who was from an educator who was not, didn't have an RE background, and they gave a really, well, I thought it was really powerful. Lots of people, it's a bit like Marmite. People thought they were either really amazing keynote, or people said, but it didn't have anything to do with RE. And how do I apply that to my classroom? So one of the things we're going to do going forward for this year in 2024 is to provide some questions, some kind of tools template at the end of our brochure, which will outline a way questions teachers might ask themselves about the research they're listening to help them apply it to the classroom. So kind of assisting them in some way. We also last time tweaked the timings of the session slightly, and going forward, we're also going to avoid a Friday evening. Last time we had something on a Friday evening, and it was actually quite well attended, but actually less well attended than the rest. So we're not going to do that. And one of the comments last time was that some of the panel sessions didn't have so many teachers in. So this time we've basically more or less got 50-50 on the panel sessions going forward. And we've really utilised the steering group this year, both in particularly finding, if that's the right word, keynotes people to be able to contribute. So we've learnt a lot over the last 4 years.
Very sorry, Catherine, just quickly, so you're just finding on to your next slide, but we had an interesting comment from Carenza Passamon in the comments. So sorry if I haven't got said your name correctly, but they've mentioned that that the conference was effective in actually changing the way that they think about RE itself and how it interfaces with other subjects. And I wondered if Carenza could just maybe come in and just elaborate slightly on that. I'd love to know a bit more specifically.
Oh, hi. I wanted to say that I learned an awful lot in the first conference, and it changed the way that I understood what research actually was and how it could be run in the classroom. So now I'm much more able to encourage teachers that I work with to reflect on their practice and think about how they might use that as a centre for research. It's also changed the way that I might bring in what I've learned or what other researchers are doing into the classroom for people who are interested. So it just kind of opened up that whole interface for me in an area that I thought was pretty much separate. You did one or you did the other. And Catherine's work and Callum St Gabriel's was absolutely fantastic in opening up my eyes to that.
What new things are you teaching out of interest?
I'm not actually a teacher. I run a resources centre. It changes the way, for example, how when we run new RE resources, we might ask teachers to reflect on specifically how that changes ways of their teaching or how that looks at how children are learning. And then that enables us to connect with other bits of research, like some of the stuff on cognitive stuff, the cognitive understandings of how the children are working. So we also gain a lot from Dawn Cox and some of the work that she's doing. So it kind of basically it's just opened up the network that I can draw in and give access to.
That's wonderful. Sorry to interrupt. Looks like you have some other feedback as well, Catherine. But I thought I'd make the most of that wonderful description. Oh, back to you.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. I can't see the chat currently, so I'll have to look afterwards. But one of the things, just to build on what Carenza was saying as well, some people here might not be aware that there isn't really any EEF research. EEF is one of the places that a lot of teachers go to, and there isn't really any for RE. And so therefore, this conference has provided a platform where teachers can engage with research of all different types, perhaps because there are less places, kind of centralized places that other teachers might go to for that research. So hopefully kind of again, these are a couple of quotes from the 2022 conference. And again, I think you can see how these comments I chose particularly because I think they built on from what the first conference had done as well. So how do we prove we change a narrative? I don't think you can, but one of the things I think that's particularly struck me is that partly, I think, due to this conference, but probably due to other things as well, teachers of RE or religion and worldviews are more naturally talking about disciplinary knowledge, ways of knowing. And I think this conference has contributed significantly to that by showcasing some of the Be Quick projects. But more widely, I think there has been a changed narrative around RE and research full stop, basically just sort of going back to what Carenza was saying. I think, she's given an example, but I think that's the case with a number of different teachers and practitioners in this field as well. The other thing that I think particularly contributed to that was actually the Ofsted Research Review from 2021, which followed on, if you like, from our conference. And we then really built on that. So it was there was a moment in time, as I said earlier, where lots of things happened. And this conference was one of them. And then the Ofsted Research Review again then highlighted the importance of teachers and their pupils being scholarly in their approach to study. But other things like other national conferences and regional conferences now particularly referencing research, having speakers who are talking about research. There's a good example. I'm going to an event this Friday where somebody is talking about their research. I'm not sure that would have happened before. One of the Twitter chats, RE Chat UK, has had sessions about specifically research, and also just on social media, people putting their research, sharing their research more in the subject. We've also developed some of our own initiatives around research as well to build on this. So I'll just briefly explain some of these. As a result of the first conference, we decided to develop a research area on what's called the RE Online website, which is a website that we host particularly for teachers and practitioners. And we've featured a different piece of research each month for a considerable amount of time now, must be a couple of years, I think now, probably. And there's a picture of the latest one there on the screen that usually includes a short film, as well as some text and infographics and some questions for teachers to ask themselves about research. In addition, particularly during COVID, a couple of years of COVID, we ran some online in conversation events between researchers and teachers to talk about their experiences of research. And they had a lot of downloads. We also had decided to then develop RE Exchange going forward. Again, we're very grateful to Templeton for funding both this coming year and in 2026. We've had 190 people sign up so far. Registrations have been open for about a month or so now. And we know that, well, we hope that that will grow. I'm sure it will. And some other things that it's really made us think about as an organisation. What kind of formats are best for teachers in terms of disseminating research? So we have a couple of focus groups that we use to discuss with them what are the best ways of being able to disseminate their research, and how can we platform that through our networks, through webinars, but also online through social media and so on. So we're in kind of ongoing conversations about how we can do that most effectively. And then secondly, kind of our biggest question is how do we continue to encourage teachers to engage with research, but also doing their own research as well. And again, they are ongoing questions that we are asking ourselves. But I think RE Exchange has not only, I think, changed the narrative, it's changed how we as an organisation think. When I first started, research was one kind of strategic objective, if you like, for the Trust. What's happened now is that research sits underneath all of them. So, and is threaded through everything rather than being a specific thing, it's threaded through everything we do. And so I think not only has it changed the narrative, I hope for the community, but it's also changed the culture and the narrative of the Trust itself. And I shall stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Catherine. Really, really brilliant to hear more details about the RE Exchange. Tom and I and the rest of the evaluation team just really think that the RE Exchange conference, it really sums up the sort of essence of big questions in classrooms and kind of the importance of bringing together in the same room teachers with academic researchers and kind of bridging those gaps and to use Barry's language, blurring those boundaries as well. So yeah, it's been so great to see the impact of your project.
It was a real sort of force multiplier, I think, echoing Bonnie what you said in the comments. That yeah, I think there's real evidence that that was force multiplier across the other grants by having those sorts of sessions. Right, do we have any questions for Catherine and about the conference or the future of that line of work? I don't see any hands up, so I will press on. And we are now slightly pushed on time, but I think it's right that we've given the grantees and their work the spotlight here. So this might be a little bit fast. I'll do my best. You'll get these slides. I'll share them with you, and we'll be as brief as we can to let you get back to that beautiful evening. So just to say again, the full details of the achievements, enables, barriers, and everything, that's in the report. I'm not going to talk through it all, but I'm just going to pull out some of the most valuable and surprising, interesting components of success and the lessons for the audience that we've got here, which is a little bit wider than just education, higher education. And that just, I need to quickly start that by what do our messages and what does our assessment of success build on, what supports it? And we've gone through a learning cycle, and here we are today completing the cycle. It's really wonderful. We are here bringing out the lessons of what we've learned and helping them to inform the next wave of education, innovation, ideas and programs. And the stages that we went through were, I actually didn't work here, but the first process was to go through a period of understanding the purpose of big questions in classrooms and what Bonnie had planned and intended, and what really kind of her dream was for what was to happen through big questions in classrooms. And this was about kind of cementing how knowledge works was. And then mapping that education system and thinking about different strategies for how to percolate it around. The second stage was to design a program to assess whether or not we're achieving that vision. And I've highlighted there's no point squinting, you can't see it, but that's the theory of change in miniature. So we created a theory of change, a granular plan for how the grantees were going to achieve that impact for that big picture of big questions in classrooms. Then came the tough stuff, which I also wasn't here for most of, but Lily has been there through thick and thin. There was so much data that was collected. We had hundreds of interviews, observations, grantee reports, other pieces of data that were shared by the grantees. We captured and analysed dissemination channels. And then also we had these feedback sessions through the convening events at MPC, where we got to kind of work with the grantees, what was coming up, the kind of early learnings and being able to adjust things as we go and on the fly slightly. And then the final section was, well, what does this all mean? What can we learn? And it's fantastic that we're here prioritizing this ongoing collaboration with the grantees. We've tried to synthesize our findings, and as I'll kind of go on to saying, we've sort of been evaluating our evaluation and the program as a whole, the design, to not just kind of think about what was successful in kind of a cold way, but in kind of quite a purposeful way to be part of that journey of change with Bonnie. I'm not doing what I said. I'm not keeping to time. Come on, Tom. So very quickly here, this is to sort of highlight the different ways that the grantees interface with the system, because driving innovation and change in education is hard, and good luck to the next government as they might try to do this. And the barriers do vary by subject. And this is all down to things that we know a lot about, the lack of teacher time that was mentioned already, the nature of that system, its rigidity, how it's measured ends up being how it's taught. The falling real term spending per capita is a real trend. And then there's that specific RE paradox that there is no national strategy, but at the same time, probably we can't really agree on a national strategy either. So like recognizing this complexity, the portfolio that was developed by Bonnie and the grantees, I think kind of reflected that, identified like it's a complex system. It's a web of interlocking actors and power relationships and decision makers and groups of pupils and teachers and teacher trainers. And so they identified those leverage points, and those were what were targeted by the seminars, by the academic articles, by the policy publications. That short film was part of the activities as well. That meant that didn't mean that it didn't have its challenges, especially when it came to evaluating the work, and because so many different things were kind of tried by taking this holistic approach. There was never going to be a way that we could kind of provide a league table comparing apples with apples when it came to the grantees. But we've really, with the report especially, tried to kind of focus on capturing what was successful and why, what enabled success to happen, what were those barriers, and what are the lessons for the next people who want to kind of take on the baton and try to design a new, interesting set of curricula that breaks down those barriers and asks the really hard questions and gets children engaged. And you probably noticed there that we've some things that we just couldn't capture. All that soft stuff of how the grantees have gone on and worked in their networks are a part of the system of the SACRAs, the having input into the Ofsted reports. There was a lot going on. And it's probably important here that we thinking about systems is great, and that's what Be Quick did so well. And we have some tools on taking a systems lens, which Lily will hopefully paste in the comments now. And then just a second way, I'll be really quick because there's far too much here to go through, but another way this is kind of visualized in terms of taking that holistic systems approach and trying a lot of different leverage points in the system was the theory of change for the program. And you'll notice there's a real breadth of activities that were undertaken, engaging institutions, providing interdisciplinary CPD for teachers, creating new curricula, and then working towards change not only in pupils that can maybe be sort of shorter term and sort of quite cohort based, but that longer term, how teachers are trained and what they're teaching, and then also the fundamentals of the system, the curriculum, how it's assessed, the inspection regimes. But of course, recognize that all takes a lot of time, and so that holistic approach is just one key to success, and it might look quite daunting, and it's a big program, big exciting program, but that doesn't mean it always has to be this exciting and big. There are some quick wins, and Lily will sort of just highlight some of those that are really achievable for really everybody here thinking about future programs in education.
Yeah, thank you so much, Tom. And yeah, please enjoy this hopefully more calming image of a tree with some low-hanging fruit, if you will excuse my quite on-the-nose metaphor there. Yeah, I just wanted to talk about sort of some of the successes of the Be Quick projects that, as Tom said, are quick wins. And although systems change can sound like something daunting and extremely complex, systems change doesn't have to be approached as a whole all at once. It can happen in small incremental stages. So yeah, Big Questions in Classrooms is an excellent example of how to do just that. So firstly, through our evaluation, we learned that the projects which made use of their existing resources and networks were really successful in implementing activities that stuck and led to positive outcomes for teachers and pupils. For example, evidence from the interviews that we conducted shows that the most simple and high quality, accessible and inclusive teaching resources encouraged uptake of those resources by teachers. So keeping them straightforward and clear, similar to what Murray touched on in his presentation, sort of the adaptability and flexibility of resources proved to be really successful in helping implementation. So that we know that keeping things simple and easy to adapt and to take up also sort of makes the really intricate and sometimes complex concepts easier to understand, to share with others and to implement into the classroom. So the key moments in history project, another Be Quick project, is a great example of one that used accessible visual materials like videos, which helped to gain teachers' attention and led therefore to more cross-departmental conversations and cross-departmental collaboration and working within some schools. Similarly, the Thinking Together in Science and RE through Philosophy for Children project also highlighted that the most effective resources for teachers were ones that really kept the cognitive load for teachers to a real minimum, ensuring that the content created in the resources was proportionate to teachers' own needs and capacities. Which brings me on to my next low-hanging fruit, which is involving teachers from the get-go. We know from our evaluation that without involving teachers at the heart and centre of developing education initiatives, you really run the risk of creating something that just won't work for the people who are supposed to use it and benefit from such initiatives. So, as conversations have touched on today, those Be Quick grants that really sort of gave teachers the creative control and empowered them to adopt these new approaches achieved positive impacts for teachers and for students that they were teaching as well. Those are just some of the two examples of the quick, easy wins that you can make the most of today. Of course, you can see more of the detail here in our report, but I'm going to hand back over to Tom as we are rapidly running out of time.
4 minutes to go, 4 slides. It's not gonna work, but I'm going to be extremely blunt. Decorum will go out the window here. So messages for evaluation and program design, the ones that we want to kind of pull out that were interesting. I'll be blunt. Be specific. Really try to define it, and then plan it, and then measure it. And Be Quick was, I think, was really strong on planning, also on measuring. I think there was a great amount of different types of data that built up that picture, but there was a hesitation about being too prescriptive about exactly how knowledge works, was defining that in terms of the education outcomes, or perhaps the teaching too. So there was that kind of has a knock-on effect on how you can kind of measure it. And these types of things like curiosity, like active citizenship, like the quality of materials, they do have frameworks out there. And I know I found one. So there is a 5-dimensional curiosity scale that's been devised, which is an example of a validated scale, 25 questions that run through 5 different dimensions of curiosity. And it's just an example of maybe something that could be adapted and used when it came to kind of defining, being specific, and maybe it kind of leads a bit back to what Catherine's point about how do we know if we've changed the conversation, if we know right what our words are. I know it's a simplification, and as academics we have to hate it, but if we've got a kind of key phrase or a brand, that does allow us to measure and get a sense whether or not things are moving and changing. I think the very final thing I want to say with 1 or 2 minutes to go is that I think I'll just read the quote. So somebody said in one of the interviews, like, no one's going to read a report if we just write 300 pages that are boring, but you need to make things short and think about the audience. And while Lily and I were kind of reflecting on this session, how to use it, and that funny quote, we kind of realized that actually as evaluators, we are part of that journey of change with Bonnie, with the grantees. It's not about kind of cold performance management and ranking, but we want to go through cycles of improvement while it's going on, and then also make sure we kind of join up that learning so that the circle's complete, and Be Quick, if it continues, has evolved and is stronger for going through this. And this moment here, you being here on a hot Wednesday is part of that, joining the circle up, spreading the word about what was learned. And thank you so much for coming. With 1 minute to go, I just want to highlight that coming up next, the grantees and Bonnie and Lily and I will be planning a policy and practice roundtable that will be a lot more focused on kind of a bit more systems change, and try to get some of the representatives, the experts, decision makers together to discuss this with an agenda. We're also seeking other opportunities to talk about this kind of stuff too, so do let us know. And then if you've been particularly confused or excited by any of the more methodological elements about evaluation or impact, we've got some wonderful NPC events coming up. We're talking about systems change on the 3rd of July for an hour and a half. It would be great if you want to think about systems thinking. We have our summer reception. Everybody's invited. Please follow the link to join that for some schmoozing with the great and the good in the charity sector. And then also in July, a session on how to make evaluation proportionate, which could be relevant for all of you working either in education or more widely. And then NBC Ignites is like the big summit for the social sector that's taking place in October that we host. And so please do come along, follow the link that will be in an email, and we'd love to see you there. It's 5:30.